I did not recover this archive intact. What remains of it arrived in Vault 13 as a fractured collection of emergency audio files, maintenance records, and personal recordings extracted from devices that should not have survived prolonged exposure to the elements. Several of the files were mislabeled. Others carried timestamps that conflicted with their own contents. A few had no timestamps at all, only durations that ended mid-waveform, as if the recording itself had been interrupted rather than stopped. The material originates from a rural municipality whose civil defense infrastructure was decommissioned quietly and without ceremony. No formal shutdown order exists. No dismantling permits were filed. The Siren Tower still stands according to satellite imagery, though I have found no recent ground-level photographs that include it. Every image sourced after the incident seems to exclude the tower unintentionally, framed just wide or just narrow enough to avoid it. That absence is consistent with the rest of the record. The archive centers on a single event, an outdoor warning siren activated without authorization and continued to sound for an extended period of time. Not minutes, not hours, long enough for the distinction to stop mattering to those who heard it. This was not a weather alert. There were no storms in the region, no seismic activity, no tests scheduled or announced. The control system logs show no access attempts at the time of activation. The siren did not stutter, surge, or degrade as mechanical systems typically do under stress. It operated within expected parameters until the day the town itself ceased to function in any recognizable way. I want to be clear about something before continuing. This archive does not contain a clean recording of the siren itself. Every attempt to isolate and preserve the sound has resulted in progressive distortion across unrelated files. Playback artifacts appear in material that should be silent. Compression errors manifest differently depending on who accesses the data. In 2 instances, waveform previews changed between sessions without any corresponding modification to the source file. Because of this, the siren's tone has been transcribed rather than reproduced. Frequency analysis is described, not demonstrated. You will not hear the sound that the residents heard. That is intentional, and it is the reason this archive remains accessible at all. The earliest materials are mundane. Emergency dispatch logs documenting confused calls from residents asking whether a test had been announced. Maintenance tickets entered by public works personnel assuming a stuck relay or failed cutoff switch. Short radio exchanges between county officials attempting to determine who had authorization to silence the system. No one expresses fear at first, only inconvenience. The siren is loud, but it is familiar. It belongs to the town. It has a purpose people understand, even if they cannot explain why it is active. That understanding erodes slowly. As the hours pass, the tone does not change, but the way people describe it does. Some report headaches, others complain of pressure, like elevation sickness without the altitude. A few mention difficulty sleeping even after leaving the area, as if the sound continued after it was no longer audible. These reports were initially dismissed. Stress reactions, fatigue, confirmation bias. Then people began leaving messages that were never intended for emergency services. Voicemails addressed to no one in particular. Audio recordings made indoors, whispering, as though the siren might hear them through the walls. In several cases, callers apologize for bothering dispatch before correcting themselves and continuing anyway. I reviewed these messages multiple times, looking for signs of panic or hysteria. They are remarkably calm. The first disappearance is recorded in a single-line entry. A public works employee sent to visually inspect the siren tower during heavy fog. His vehicle was found later, parked legally, engine off, keys removed. The inspection report was never completed. After that, the tone of the archive changes. Not dramatically. There is no moment where everything collapses at once. What changes is the assumption that the siren is a malfunction. Gradually, reluctantly, the records begin to treat it as something that is doing exactly what it was designed to do, just not for us. I have restricted this archive because it does not end with resolution. The siren is not silenced within these materials. The event is not closed. The final county report contradicts nearly every piece of primary evidence while offering no alternative explanation. What remains is a pattern, one that appears elsewhere in Vault 13 under different names, different locations, and different signal sources. I am documenting this file not to explain what happened, but to preserve the shape of it. The sequence of decisions, the moment when listening became a liability. If you continue, do not listen for meaning in the sound itself. Listen instead to what people chose to do while it was playing. The siren activated at 6:14 a.m. That time appears consistently across every surviving system log tied to the event. Dispatch consoles, radio repeaters, a traffic camera whose internal clock drifted several minutes fast, but corrected itself when compared against network records later recovered. Even handwritten notes taken by a night shift supervisor reference the same minute, though the handwriting grows uncertain around the numerals, as if the writer paused before committing them to the page. There was no alert issued beforehand. The county did not test outdoor warning sirens on weekdays. Tests were scheduled quarterly, announced through local radio and posted notices, always at noon. This activation occurred during the shift change between overnight and morning dispatch. The timing was unfortunate, but not suspicious enough on its own to raise alarms. The first call came in 40 seconds after activation. A resident on the north side of town reported the siren was running early and asked whether the schedule had changed. The dispatcher confirmed there was no test planned and asked the caller to remain indoors while she checked with Public Works. Her tone was neutral. She followed procedure. 2 more calls followed within the next minute, then 6. Then the line queue filled. Most callers assumed it was a mistake, a power surge, a stuck relay. One caller joked that someone had leaned on the wrong button. Another asked whether the siren was supposed to sound different now because it felt louder than usual. The dispatcher reassured them that mechanical sirens often sounded harsher under certain weather conditions. There was light fog that morning. Visibility was reduced, but not dangerously so. The temperature hovered just above freezing. There were no storm systems approaching the region. No watches or warnings issued by state or federal agencies. No seismic activity. No alerts from neighboring counties. At 6:19 a.m., the dispatch supervisor contacted Public Works. The maintenance ticket created at that moment is unremarkable. It lists the siren location, the nature of the issue, and a preliminary assessment. Suspected relay fault, possible controller failure, recommended manual inspection once daylight improved. The siren continued to sound. Its cadence matched the standard warning pattern, rising and falling tones designed to carry over long distances. It was not a steady alarm. It breathed. People had heard it before. That familiarity is important. By 6:27 a.m., the calls changed in character. Several residents reported that the sound seemed closer than it should have been. Others claimed it was louder indoors than outside, though no one could explain how they had reached that conclusion without stepping out to check. One caller mentioned that the siren felt directional, as if it were aimed rather than broadcast. The dispatcher logged these comments, but did not escalate them. Sound perception is subjective. Fog refracts noise. Anxiety amplifies sensation. These explanations were sufficient. At 6:34 a.m., the first radio check was made to the siren controller. The control system responded normally. Power levels were within expected ranges. The shutdown command was acknowledged but did not terminate the signal. A second attempt produced the same result. The system reported compliance while the siren continued uninterrupted. Public Works assumed the controller interface had failed to assert physical control over the relay. This was not unheard of in older installations. The recommended response was to cut power at the source. That plan required a field visit. By this time, the town was awake. School administrators called asking whether classes should be delayed. A grocery store manager requested guidance on whether to evacuate customers. A local clinic asked if there had been a chemical spill or transportation accident. Dispatch provided the same answer to all of them. There was no confirmed threat. The siren was under investigation. Residents were advised to remain indoors until further notice. Most complied. The siren had been designed to encourage that behavior. Outdoor warning systems were never meant to be subtle. They were meant to override routine, to push people inside, to gather families, to focus attention inward. In that sense, the system was functioning as intended. At 6:52 a.m., a county radio technician attempted to isolate the siren feed. He noted something unusual in his report. The siren's signal appeared clean. No interference, no voltage fluctuations, no evidence of mechanical strain. It sounded, in his words, healthy. This was unexpected. Siren motors degrade audibly under prolonged operation. Bearings heat, tones waver. None of that was present. The waveform captured through indirect monitoring showed consistency bordering on precision. At 7:03 a.m., dispatch received the first non-complaint call. A woman on the east side of town called to ask whether she was supposed to hear words beneath the siren. The dispatcher asked her to repeat herself. The caller hesitated, then laughed and apologized. She said it was probably nothing. She had not slept well. The sound was getting to her. She thanked the dispatcher and ended the call. The dispatcher marked the incident as caller stress. By 7:10 a.m., fog density increased around the low-lying areas near the siren tower. Traffic cameras recorded headlights moving more slowly than usual. Several vehicles pulled over, drivers waiting for the sound to stop before continuing. At 7:18 a.m., the county emergency manager authorized a site visit. A public works employee was dispatched to visually inspect the tower and, if possible, manually disconnect power. His name appears repeatedly in the logs afterward, always in reference to his absence. He acknowledged the assignment over radio at 7:21 a.m. His voice was clear. He sounded mildly annoyed, not concerned. He commented that he would be quick about it. That transmission is the last confirmed communication from him. At 7:29 a.m., dispatch attempted to reach him for a status update. There was no response. At 7:33 a.m., a second attempt was made on an alternate channel. Still no response. At 7:40 a.m., the dispatcher logged the possibility that the siren's volume might be interfering with radio reception near the tower. This was considered plausible. Sirens are loud, they vibrate structures, they can disrupt nearby electronics. The siren continued. Calls kept coming in. Some residents reported nausea. Others described a sensation of pressure behind the eyes. Several said they could feel the sound more than hear it, like standing near heavy machinery. A teacher reported that students arriving early for a scheduled activity were unusually quiet, sitting still without prompting. When asked why, one student reportedly said they were listening. This comment was not escalated. At 8:02 a.m., dispatch received a voicemail instead of a call. The message was short. The caller did not identify themselves. They said they did not need help. They only wanted someone to know that the siren sounded different when you stopped trying to ignore it. The dispatcher saved the message and returned to the call queue. By mid-morning, the town existed in a suspended state. Businesses delayed opening. Schools held students indoors. Emergency services remained active, but hesitant to deploy personnel near the siren tower without confirmation of safety. The fog did not lift. The siren did not change. At 9:11 a.m., the Public Works employee's vehicle was located. It was parked along the access road leading toward the tower. The engine was off. The keys were not in the ignition. There were no signs of mechanical failure, no skid marks, no damage. The vehicle was facing away from the tower. Dispatch logged the find and attempted again to contact the employee by radio and phone. There was no response. At this point, the incident was escalated to a missing person report. The siren was still treated as a separate issue. County officials debated whether to request assistance from neighboring jurisdictions. There was reluctance to overreact. No one wanted to justify calling in additional resources for what still appeared to be a malfunctioning alarm system. At 9:26 a.m., a maintenance supervisor suggested disabling the siren remotely by cutting power to the entire circuit. This was attempted. The grid acknowledged the change. Load readings adjusted. Other systems on the circuit went dark. The siren did not stop. That fact is recorded without commentary in the log. Just a line item. Action taken. Result unchanged. From that point forward, the language in the records becomes careful. Writers avoid definitive statements. Phrases like appears to and may indicate become common. No one claims to understand what is happening. They only document what continues to occur. Calls shift again in tone. People stop asking when the siren will turn off. Instead, they ask whether it is safe to go outside. Dispatch advises them to stay indoors. That advice is no longer based on protocol. It is based on pattern. Those who remain indoors report discomfort, anxiety, and exhaustion. But they remain accounted for. Those who step outside, even briefly, often do not call back. By late morning, several addresses near the tower are marked with notes indicating unanswered door checks. Emergency responders knock. They announce themselves. They wait. No one answers. The siren continues to sound. At 10:14 a.m., dispatch receives another voicemail. This one is longer. The caller speaks quietly, as though whispering might be more appropriate. They apologize for calling the wrong number again. They say they know dispatch is busy. They say they just wanted to say that the sound feels organized. They say it feels patient. The message ends abruptly. The dispatcher logs it and flags it for later review. No one calls back. By the end of the morning, the town is effectively sealed. Roadblocks are established not by formal order, but by absence. No one enters. Those who try are turned away by local law enforcement, citing an ongoing emergency. No one leaves. The siren remains the only constant. It does not grow louder. It does not fade. It simply continues, as it was always meant to. This is where the initial records end. Everything that follows was written with the understanding that the siren was no longer a malfunction, but a condition. That realization does not arrive all at once. It arrives the way sound does, slowly, filling every available space until there is nowhere left to retreat. By the afternoon of the first day, the siren was no longer described as an emergency signal in any official record. It was referred to instead as an environmental factor. This shift is subtle but consistent. Reports stop framing the sound as something that can be fixed and begin treating it as a condition to be managed, like weather or terrain. Decisions are made around it. Schedules adapt. People learn how to speak over it, how to pause their thoughts in the rising portions of the cadence and resume them during the fall. The town does not panic. That absence becomes one of the defining features of the event. At 12:06 p.m., a county health advisory is drafted but never formally issued. The draft recommends remaining indoors, minimizing exposure, and avoiding unnecessary travel near the Siren Tower. It cites reports of headaches, nausea, and disorientation. It does not mention disappearances. By then, there are 3. None are labeled as such yet. The second missing individual is a volunteer firefighter who left his home to assist with door-to-door wellness checks. His partner reports that he intended to stay on the opposite side of the street from the tower, just close enough to observe. He did not take his radio. He did not expect to be gone long. The third is a delivery driver who entered the town shortly after noon, unaware of the situation. His truck is later found idling near an intersection, turn signal still blinking. The cab is empty. The cargo is untouched. In all 3 cases, there is no sign of distress, no evidence of struggle, no damage, no discarded belongings. Just absence. Emergency services begin altering their procedures. Responders no longer approach the tower directly. They set boundaries measured not in distance, but in clarity. Reports note that the siren does not grow louder near the tower so much as it grows cleaner. The sound loses echo. It sharpens. Individual oscillations become easier to distinguish. Several responders report the urge to stop moving when they reach this zone. One describes it as the feeling you get when someone says your name in a crowded room. You are not sure who spoke, but you know the sound was meant for you. That responder is reassigned to desk duty. At 1:18 p.m., a regional audio technician is brought in remotely to analyze indirect recordings of the siren captured by traffic cameras, phone microphones, and home security systems. He is not given access to live feeds. The concern is no longer equipment damage, but personnel exposure. His initial report is cautious. The siren's primary frequency matches standard outdoor warning systems. However, he notes persistent harmonic structures beneath the audible range, sub-frequencies that repeat with mathematical regularity. They are not noise, they are organized. He suggests these may be artifacts of recording compression. He does not sound convinced. As the day progresses, dispatch logs reflect a new pattern. Calls are shorter. Callers speak less. Many hang up without explanation. Some simply stay on the line, breathing, until the dispatcher asks if they need assistance. Several callers ask whether the siren can hear them. Dispatchers respond with reassurance. Sirens do not have microphones. They do not listen. They broadcast. This answer satisfies fewer people as time passes. By mid-afternoon, residents begin reporting dreams while awake. One woman describes lying on her living room floor, eyes open, convinced she can see the sound moving through the air like a physical thing. She apologizes for calling and says she knows it sounds strange. She says she only wanted to confirm that she is still inside. The dispatcher asks her to remain where she is. A man calls to say the siren sounds different when you speak to it out loud. He laughs, embarrassed, and says he tried it as a joke. He says he will not do it again. The dispatcher advises him to avoid unnecessary noise. At 2:41 p.m., a deputy reports something that does not fit. While assisting with perimeter control, he notes that the siren appears quieter when vehicles pass through certain stretches of road. Not consistently quieter. Muted, as though something were interfering with the sound between source and listener. He cannot identify what that something might be. His report is acknowledged and set aside. Fog thickens again in the late afternoon, settling low and uneven. It does not behave like typical weather. It gathers near intersections, near open doorways, near the access road leading toward the tower. Visibility drops. The siren remains audible everywhere. At 3:09 p.m., dispatch receives a voicemail from inside a home less than a mile from the tower. The caller whispers. The siren is faint in the background, filtered by walls and distance. The caller says they think the sound is changing, not in volume, in intent. They say it feels like it is waiting for something to answer. They ask whether anyone else has noticed this. The dispatcher flags the message. At 3:27 p.m., a local radio station attempts to broadcast an advisory, reminding residents to remain indoors. The signal goes out as scheduled. It is received clearly in surrounding towns. Within the affected area, the broadcast is partially masked by the siren's cadence. Words fall into the troughs of the sound and are swallowed during the rise. Listeners later report difficulty recalling what was said, only that the siren felt closer while the announcement played. The station ceases further attempts. By early evening, officials face a dilemma. They need eyes near the tower to understand what is happening. They also understand that sending people closer has resulted in disappearance. The language shifts again. They stop saying lost. They stop saying missing. They say unavailable. At 5:02 p.m., a drone is launched. It is a small, commercially available unit equipped with a camera and limited telemetry. The operator keeps it low, approaching from the south, where terrain offers partial visual cover. The live feed is monitored by 3 people. The drone reaches the edge of the fog bank and begins to behave erratically. Not violently. It slows. Its movements become hesitant, as though the control inputs are being delayed. The camera feed remains stable. The siren tower becomes visible through the haze. It appears normal. No visible damage, no fire, no tampering. The structure stands as it always has. The siren head rotates smoothly, driven by a motor that should have overheated hours ago. As the drone moves closer, the audio feed begins to pick up interference. Not static, rhythmic distortion that aligns with the siren's rise and fall. The operator attempts to pull the drone back. The controls respond sluggishly. The drone drifts forward instead. At 5:11 p.m., the signal is lost. The drone does not crash. It does not fall. It simply stops transmitting. The last frame captured shows the siren tower centered in view, fog curling around it as though drawn inward. That image is circulated internally and then quietly removed from shared folders. As night approaches, power usage within the town drops sharply. Residents turn off lights, screens, anything that competes with the sound. Several callers mention that darkness makes it easier to think. Emergency services consolidate operations into a single building away from the tower. Personnel rotate frequently to avoid prolonged exposure. Break rooms are kept quiet. Conversations are short. The siren is audible even here, but dulled. At 7:46 p.m., dispatch receives a call from a man who says he has been standing at his front door for several minutes, unable to bring himself to step outside. He says the siren sounds clearer when the door is open, like it has been waiting for him to do that. He asks if that is normal. The dispatcher tells him to close the door. There is a pause. He says he has already stepped onto the porch. The line goes quiet. At 8:03 p.m., a responder is sent to that address with explicit instructions not to approach the tower and not to leave visual contact with his vehicle. He reports the front door standing open. Interior lights on. No sign of the occupant. The porch is empty. The responder reports an unusual sensation while standing there. He says the siren sounds almost gentle from this location, less urgent, less harsh. He says it feels wrong to leave. He is ordered back immediately. He complies. After sunset, the calls slow, not because people are safe, because fewer people speak. Several dispatchers later report the feeling that the siren becomes easier to ignore at night, not because it weakens, but because it blends more easily with thought. Like breathing, like blood flow. At 10:19 p.m., another voicemail arrives. The caller speaks clearly, calmly. They say they think they understand now. They say the siren is not warning anyone away. It is announcing that something is available. They thank the dispatcher for listening all day. They say they are going to check something. The message ends. No return address is logged. By midnight, the town is quiet except for the siren. Emergency officials consider ordering a full evacuation of surrounding areas, but hesitate. They do not know whether movement makes things worse. They do not know whether silence invites attention. They do know that everyone who has gone toward the sound has failed to return. The siren continues to operate flawlessly, not as a malfunction, but as a process. This is when the question stops being how to shut it off and becomes how long it has been waiting to be heard. The first attempt to understand the siren rather than silence it begins shortly after midnight. By then, the town has settled into a pattern of constrained behavior. Lights are kept low, windows are sealed, doors remain closed. Conversations are brief and often whispered, not because of fear of being overheard, but because speaking loudly feels inappropriate, like interrupting something already in progress. The siren does not respond to any of this. It continues its cadence without variation, as steady at night as it was in the morning. What changes is how clearly people perceive it. Several residents later describe the sound as sharper after dark, not louder, but more precise. The rising tone feels closer to the ear. The falling tone lingers longer than expected. It is during this period that audio analysts begin working in earnest. They are given indirect recordings only. Voicemails, traffic camera audio, clips captured unintentionally by home security systems. None of these recordings contain the siren cleanly. It is always filtered through something else: walls, glass, distance, compression. This turns out to be useful. When isolated and layered, the recordings reveal a repeating structure beneath the primary signal, a pattern that does not drift, a sequence of sub-frequencies that align consistently, regardless of the source or distance from the tower. The analysts do not agree on what it represents. One suggests it resembles a synchronization signal, something meant to align multiple receivers to a common reference. Another notes that the cadence resembles older maritime signaling patterns, stripped of semantic meaning but retaining rhythm and spacing. A third analyst says it sounds like a response interval. That comment is not included in the official summary, but it appears in handwritten notes recovered later. As these findings circulate internally, dispatchers notice a shift in incoming messages. People stop describing the siren as loud. They describe it as clear. Callers report that the sound feels more defined when they stop trying to distract themselves. Television makes it worse. Music clashes with it. Silence, paradoxically, makes the siren easier to tolerate. A woman calls to say she has been sitting in her hallway with the lights off for hours. She says the siren feels less aggressive there. She says it sounds farther away, as if distance is no longer measured in space. She asks whether the sound has always been this organized. The dispatcher does not know how to answer. By early morning, the analysts confirm something unsettling. The siren's primary tone is not the most important component of the signal. The lower harmonics carry more structure. They repeat in a cycle that lasts several minutes before resetting. The reset does not align with any known mechanical process. It is too precise, too intentional. One analyst compares it to a handshake protocol. Another says it resembles an availability broadcast. They stop short of drawing conclusions, but the implication is clear. The siren is not issuing a warning. It is transmitting information. Information meant to be received, acknowledged, and acted upon. This realization reframes everything that has happened. The disappearances near the tower are no longer treated as accidents or side effects. They are interpreted as responses. Individuals who moved toward the sound were not overwhelmed or incapacitated. They answered. This interpretation gains traction when voicemail transcripts are reviewed in sequence. Early messages are confused, curious, anxious. Later ones are apologetic. The final messages are calm. Several callers thank dispatchers for their patience. Some express relief. A few mention that the siren feels clearer now that they have stopped resisting it. One voicemail, left shortly before dawn, stands out. The caller speaks evenly. They say they have been listening carefully. They say the sound is not directional in the way people assume. It is not louder near the tower. It is clearer when there are fewer obstructions. They say the fog is not blocking the sound. It is reducing interference. This observation aligns with reports from responders who noted that the siren felt cleaner near the tower, not more intense. The closer one gets, the less distortion there is between the signal and the listener. Distance, it seems, is not the relevant factor. Clarity is. By mid-morning on the second day, officials make a decision they do not document formally. They stop attempting to disable the siren. No further shutdown commands are issued. No additional power cuts are attempted. The grid remains partially severed, but no one expects that to matter anymore. The focus shifts to containment. Roadblocks are reinforced. Surrounding jurisdictions are advised to reroute traffic. The town is described in communications as unstable, unsafe, temporarily inaccessible. No one uses the word evacuation. They do not want to encourage movement. Inside the town, those who remain indoors continue to survive. They report fatigue, headaches, and difficulty concentrating, but they remain present, accounted for. Those who leave their shelters do not. A pattern emerges in the timing of these disappearances. They occur during the low point of the siren's cadence, the moment when the sound dips, when the oscillation seems to pause before rising again. Several recordings capture a subtle shift at that point, a deepening of the sub-frequency, a sense of anticipation. It is during these moments that people open doors, step onto porches, walk toward intersections, not hurried, not distressed, as if responding to a cue. At 11:43 a.m., a county official records a memo that is never sent. In it, they speculate that the siren system may have been repurposed or misconfigured decades ago, that its placement and frequency could align with geological features beneath the town, that it may be interacting with something not accounted for in the original design. They cross this out and write something else. They write that the siren may not belong to the town at all, that it may simply be using it. This memo is found later among personal effects. It is not entered into any database. By the afternoon of the second day, the number of missing residents is no longer tracked publicly. Internally, the list grows. There are no recoveries, no bodies, no evidence of violence, just homes left unlocked, cars parked neatly, meals left half-finished. The siren continues. At 4:18 p.m., a final coordinated review of the audio data takes place. The analysts agree on one thing: the signal is not continuous. It repeats because it is waiting. Each cycle ends with a pause long enough for a response. When no response comes, the cycle begins again. When a response does come, it does not register on any instrument still operating. It registers elsewhere. This understanding spreads quietly among officials and responders. No announcement is made. No protocol is issued. People simply stop encouraging investigation. They begin encouraging stillness. The final voicemail received by dispatch arrives shortly after sunset. The caller does not whisper. They speak normally. They say they have been listening since the first morning. They say they think the siren is not meant to harm anyone. It is meant to locate something that can hear it properly. They say that indoors the sound is muffled, interrupted, broken by walls and insulation and human design. They say that outside the sound is whole. They apologize for calling so many times. They say they do not think they will need to call again. The message ends without interruption. There is no background noise, no footsteps, no door opening. Only the siren, distant but clear. After that, the dispatch lines fall silent. Not because the siren stops, because those who remain know better than to speak during the interval. They understand now that the sound is not a warning, it is an invitation. And it has been broadcasting patiently, long before anyone thought to listen. I finished cataloging this archive at 3:12 a.m., vault time. The siren did not stop while I worked. That statement requires clarification. There is no active siren within Vault 13. No audible signal, no vibration in the walls, no detectable frequency in the air. And yet, while reviewing the final voicemails, I became aware of a cadence that did not originate from the speakers. Not a sound exactly, a sense of interval, a pattern of expectation that made it difficult to determine when one thought ended and the next began. I paused the playback several times to confirm that the audio had stopped. It had. The town involved in this incident no longer exists in any functional capacity. It was never officially declared abandoned. No evacuation order was filed. No disaster designation was issued. It simply ceased to appear in records that require active participation to maintain. Utility billing, school enrollment, property tax assessments. Maps still show it if you look for it deliberately. Satellite imagery still resolves rooftops and roads, but there are no recent ground-level confirmations that show habitation. The siren tower remains visible from certain angles, though attempts to photograph it directly often result in framing errors or focus failures that cannot be replicated intentionally. This archive does not conclude with silence. The siren was never confirmed disabled. The final county report states that the system was rendered inoperative due to infrastructure failure, but provides no supporting documentation. Maintenance logs end without closure. Power grid records contradict themselves. The language used becomes abstract, imprecise, as though the authors were trying to describe something that did not fit the categories available to them. I have seen this before, not the siren itself, but the pattern surrounding it. A signal treated first as noise, then as malfunction, then as anomaly, and finally as environment. A gradual shift from action to accommodation, from problem-solving to behavior modification. There are other files in Vault 13 that follow this shape. A number station that continued broadcasting after its transmitter was dismantled. A maritime beacon that activated inland, miles from any navigable water. A radio telescope that recorded a repeating interval only when no one was monitoring it directly. Each case involves a signal that was not hostile, only selective. In reviewing the audio analyses from this archive, I was struck by how often the word clarity appears. Not volume, not intensity. Clarity. The closer one came to removing interference, the more complete the signal became. Walls interfered, insulation interfered, human habitation interfered. Those who remained indoors survived, not because they were protected, but because they were partially deaf. The sound reached them broken, distorted, incomplete. Enough to unsettle, not enough to answer. Those who went outside did not vanish in panic or confusion. They responded during the interval. During the pause when the signal waited to be acknowledged. I have restricted this archive because it encourages a specific kind of listening. Not the passive kind, not the analytical kind, but the sort that seeks patterns where none should exist, that waits for repetition to resolve into meaning, that leans into silence expecting something to fill it. That impulse is dangerous. I am aware that by documenting this file, I am participating in the same process that led to the event itself. Preservation is a form of amplification. Description invites reconstruction. Even transcription carries risk. That is why the siren itself is not reproduced here, only its effects, only the choices people made while it played. I will note one final irregularity. While cross-referencing this archive against older Vault material, I identified 3 unrelated incidents that include identical sub-frequency descriptions. Different decades, different locations, different signal sources. In each case, the records end shortly after analysts conclude that the signal is waiting for something to respond. In none of those cases does the signal stop. I am not suggesting that the siren was built for this purpose, only that it was suitable. Infrastructure endures longer than intention. Systems persist after their creators are gone. Sometimes they continue doing what they were designed to do. Sometimes they find new functions. Sometimes they are found. This archive is now sealed under restricted access. Future archivists are advised not to listen for cadence, not to count intervals, not to test silence between repetitions. There is no benefit in knowing whether the signal still waits. If it does, it has been patient before. If it does not, then there is nothing to be gained by listening closely enough to find out. Logging this file not as a warning, but as a record of compliance. The siren did not force anyone to come to it. It simply made itself clear, and that was enough. This concludes the recovered file. May future listeners take caution in its implications. The Archivist, Vault 13.